අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT Mobitel දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9 this Thursday, the 29th of June 2023. No bank hold-up. Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe assures that the banking system will not be subjected to domestic debt restructuring. Uninterested interest. Restructuring of domestic debt will bring down the interest rates, says President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
It's a matter of months before it comes down. Secondly, the development assistance will start, which will be a boost for part of the construction sector.
DDR for bondholders. Independent parliamentarian Udaya Gammanpilla says that the bondholders wanted Sri Lanka's domestic debt to be restructured.
Our government's negotiating team failed to convince the bondholders that local debt should not be restructured. That's why we are facing this issue.
More world, more bank. World Bank approved $700 million worth of budgetary and welfare support to Sri Lanka.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරම.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දිනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
This is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and a warm welcome to today's edition of AdaDerana's English News First at 9. Let's take a look at your top story. The Central Bank Governor, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, says that the banking system is excluded from the domestic debt restructuring process. Addressing a special media briefing to brief the heads of media institutions on the domestic debt optimization strategy of the government, the central bank chief assured that deposits in the 57 million accounts of the country's banking system will be protected. Further, the governor assured that the employees' provident fund savings already accumulated would not be impacted, whilst guaranteeing a minimum 9% interest for the EPF.
A special media briefing to brief the heads of media institutions on the domestic debt optimization strategy of the government was held this morning under the patronage of Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe and Treasury Secretary Mahinda Siriwardana.
රට මූලා දීලා තියෙන ඉතාම තියුණු අභියෝගයකට අපි රටේ මේ තත්ත්වයේ තිබුණා වුණාට මම මුදල් ලේකම් මිත්‍ර විශේෂම සඳහන් කරන්න කැමතියි අපේ අභියෝග තාම ඉවර නැහැ. මොකද මේක තිරසාර විදිහට පවත්වාගෙන යන්න නම් අනිවාර්යෙන් මේ හා සම්බන්ධ මේ කටයුතු කළ යුතුමයි. අපිට දේශීය ණය ප්‍රතිව්‍යුහගත නොකරොත් එහෙම මේ දායකත්වය අපි නොදොනොත් එහෙම විදේශ වශයෙන් අපි රිස්ට්‍රක්චරින් වලට එන එක හම්බෙන්නෙත් නැහැ. එතකොට අපි දැන් මේ වෙලාවේ IMF එකත් එක්ක ප්‍රෝග්‍රෑම් එකකට අවිල්ලා තියෙනවා. එතකොට මේ ප්‍රෝග්‍රෑම් එකේ ක්‍රියාකාරීත්වයත් මේ රීස්ට්‍රක්චරින් අපි දක්වන මේ ප්‍රගතිය උඩ තමයි රැඳිලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒතර ඒක නොවුනොත් එහෙම අපේ රටේ අනාගතය ගැන හිතා ගන්න බෑ මොකක්ද වෙන්නේ කියන එක.
විශේෂයෙන් ජනතාවගේ තැන්පත් ආරක්ෂා කර ගැනීම එකක්. අනිත් අතෙන් මේ EPF වගේ සේවකයන් අර්ථාස්කර මුදල තියෙන මුදල් යම් කිසි ආකාරයක කොහොමද හානියක් නොවේ ආරක්ෂා කරගන්නේ. ඒ අනුව තමයි අපි මේ නෙගෝසියේෂන් වලට සාකච්ඡා සම්බන්ධ වෙලා යම් කිසි ආකාරයක යෝජනාවකට එකඟ වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. බැංකු පැත්තෙන් ගත්තාම බැංකු පද්ධතියෙන් ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම දැනටමත් විශාල දායකත්වයක් රජයේ ණයබර අඩු කිරීමට කරනවා. දැනටමත් මුළු බදු ප්‍රතිශතය බැංකු වලින් ගෙවන 50%ටත් වැඩි. ඒකට සාපේක්ෂව බැලුවොත් සුපර්ඇනියුෂන් ෆන්ඩ්ස් EPF වගේ වයි බදු අය කරන්නේ 14%යි. ඒක අඩු බදු අනුපාතයක් තමයි. ඒක විතර 14% පමණයි ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ අය කරන්නේ. රටේ ජනතාව මිලියන 20ක් විතර ජනතාව වුණාට මිලියන 57ක් බැංකු ගිණුම ඔබ හැමගේ අපේ බැංකු වල ගිණුම් තියෙනවා. ගිණුම් වල මුදල් තියෙනවා. ඒතකොට මේ මුදල් වලට යම් කිසියක් වුණොත් බැංකු පද්ධතියට එක බැංකුවක් හෝ යම් කිසි තාරක වුණොත් බැංකු පද්ධතියට වෙන හානිය ඉතාම විශාලයි. එහෙම දෙයක් වුණොත් අපිට ප්‍රධානම අරමුණ සහ ඒක මහ බැංකු වශයෙන් බැංකු පද්ධතිය සහ තැන්පත් කරවගේ මුදල් ආරක්ෂා කරගන්න ඔබ ඒක තමයි පළවෙනි කාරණය. ඒක නිසා තමයි බැංකු පද්ධතියට තියන්න ඕනේ නැහැ කියලා කිව්වේ. විශේෂයෙන් අපි EPF එකේ කියන එක අපි බලුවාම විශාලම ෆන්ඩ් එක 9% අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ ඉදිරි යනකොට ඉදිරි වසර කීපය තුළ 9% රිටර්න් එක 9% දිගටම ගන්න පුළුවන් අඩුම ගන්න ඊළඟ අවුරුදු දෙක තුන තුළ. එතනින් එහාට ආයෝජනය කරන හැටියට රිටර්න් එක හම්බෙන විදිහට තමන්ගේ EPF එකේ තියෙන බැලන්ස් එක දැනට තියෙන ස්ටේට්මන්ට් එකේ තියෙන බැලන්ස් එක ඒක අඩු වෙන්නේ නැහැ. හැමම තමන්ගේ තියෙන බැලන්ස් එක හැමම තියෙනවා. ඉදිරියේදී ලැබෙන්න තියෙන රිටර්න් එක සහ ආයෝජනය ලැබෙන ප්‍රතිලාභය 9% සහතික කරනවා. ඊළඟ වැඩ කරන පටන් ගන්න දින තුළ මේකට නෝටිස් එකක් අනවුන්ස් කරන ලොන්ච් එක අලුතෙන් බොන්ඩ්ස් පරණ බොන්ඩ්ස් අරගෙන අලුතෙන් බොන්ඩ් ඉෂුව කරලා මාකට් එක ජූලයි මාසය ඇතුළත මේක සම්පූර්ණ කරන්න තමයි.
Staying on topic, President Ranil Wickremesinghe confirms that the restructuring of domestic debt will reduce interest rates and will pave the way for the inflow of development assistance. During a meeting with the country's business associations today, President Wickremesinghe called on them to educate their respective workforces on the nuances of the domestic debt restructuring initiative.
A discussion between President Ranil Wickremesinghe, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Joint Apparel Association Forum and Sri Lanka Banks Association was held at the Presidential Secretariat today.
We believe that bringing in some kind of relief for the capital of basically the interest payments what we are making right now will definitely add value and promote the investments and continuity of the private sector, because right now we see many small and medium and also the large private sector are closing down and looking at various other markets to move in. We will have to look at retaining them internally, because we have seen number of large companies who have been in the trade for more than 30-40 years are closing down. When you look at the energy sector, we will have to give some kind of solution there, and restructuring of CEB must take a primary role within the next couple of months, so that at least there will be some consolation given to the private sector for them to continue their business in an affordable manner and an internationally competitive manner.
With the current proposal, we can reach the GFN targets, that's critical, and also this is a huge debt relief from a cash outflow perspective. The only challenge, the way I look at it from a revenue standpoint and expenditure standpoint, still government will have a serious concern in terms of paying interest for the domestic debts. So the revenue broadening would be critical for the government. We have to increase tax files. I don't think we can run with the current tax base and reach the targets.
This is probably the best thing that could have happened, especially protecting the banking system, because otherwise already struggling economy, we would have struggled with the banks having to have other issues. But having said that, hopefully the banks will now start making cheaper funds available to the private sector. I think that has been not coming forth, so we really look forward to that happening. This way investments can continue. I think everything has come to a standstill in the last 18 to 24 months. So the economy to move forward, we need cheaper funds to coming into the private sector.
I think best is to go out and explain what this debt restructuring means to you all and to the workforce. I think that's what you all can do. If you can keep that momentum in the next few days, it will be very, very helpful. But this is about the best that we can achieve. With this comes the fact that our interest rates will come down. It's a matter of months before it comes down. Secondly, the development assistance will start, which will be a boost for part of the construction sector.
Independent parliamentarian Udaya Gammanpilla says that the debt negotiation team representing the government has failed to convey to the bondholders that domestic debt will not be restructured. Speaking to Indivari Amawatta during our program at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24, he said that the government's earlier stance of not restructuring domestic debt changed following the message of bondholders that restructuring domestic debt is a prerequisite to restructuring bonds. Meanwhile, parliamentarian of the Samagi Jana Balawegaya, Derana English, said Sri Lanka should carefully restructure domestic debt to avoid the creation of another crisis.
Y'all have been questioning the stability of the banking sector and the question of EPF funds. I'd like to open with your views voiced recently.
We don't have confirmed official proposal to give our opinion about it. For a week or so, we have been talking about the debt restructuring because government has announced it. There are panic withdrawal of fixed deposits from the banks because when people are in dark, they imagine the worst. We talk about this issue based on assumptions, imaginations, and the unconfirmed information given by unofficial sources. Firstly, government had a strong stand that there will be no domestic debt restructuring. although they now claim we are bound to do so in terms of the IMF agreement, there is no such obligation, there is no such condition. So, why government has changed its stand all of a sudden? Reason, there is no such obligation, but when government negotiated with our international bondholders, the bondholders have the lion's share in our debt portfolio, so they have insisted that domestic debt restructuring is a prerequisite for restructuring the bonds. So our government's negotiating team failed to convince the bondholders that local debt should not be restructured. That's why we are facing this issue. The government has three options. Firstly, in respect of restructuring the domestic debt, extending the repayment period or maturity dates. Secondly, reducing the interest rate. Thirdly, reduction in capital, which is known as haircut. According to unofficial sources, we don't know the real proposal, there will be no haircut. Only replacement of the existing bonds with lower interest rate and longer maturity date. There are 5 banks in Sri Lanka, of which exposure to the government debt is more than 25% of their debt portfolio. So they have taken deposit from people as fixed deposits, say for 2 years, 10% interest rate. Then they have deposited those funds in government bonds for 2 years, because they expect when this fixed deposit matures, they have the funds from the bonds to repay it. Now government says we are going to replace the bonds with a longer maturity date. Then at the maturity date after 2 years, the bank can't expect money from the government. Instead, they issue another bond. But on the other hand, the person who deposited money at the bank, he needs his money back because he may have deposited for 2 years. His son is doing A-levels. Now he wants to send his son for a foreign country for further education. He needs money back. But banks don't have money because government has replaced the money payment with another piece of paper. Then bank has the option of going to the secondary bond market to discount this or trade this, to encash this. But our only worry, when every single bank comes with huge volumes of bonds to trade in the secondary market, will there be sufficient buyers? If there are no sufficient buyers, central bank should come forward to guarantee that if there are no buyers, we will purchase those bonds. Unless central bank doesn't give that guarantee, our banks will face a liquidity issue.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe and the central bank governor too came forward to assure that banking sector stability will be maintained. How do you respond to this?
We don't want a banking crisis. And as the central bank governor and the president of the country has said that they're going to do everything to avoid a banking crisis. And that's absolutely critical. We as a responsible opposition certainly want to make sure that we get out of this problem without it skyrocketing into another banking crisis. The government made an announcement saying that they won't be restructuring the treasury bills. So the holders of the treasury bills, whether they are banks or individuals, then don't have to be worried about that. But the treasury bills, the central bank holdings will probably have to be converted into bonds. Because when you look at it, to resolve this, many things that you have to look at, and the debt analysis done by the debt sustainability analysis done by the International Monetary Fund before they signed up on the agreement. One is you have to bring the debt to GDP ratio down. Sri Lanka is like 128%. For a middle income country, it has to be closer or approximately in the 60% range. So it has come a long way down. But the first target is to get this below 100. In doing that, the foreign debt will have to be restructured, no question about it. Our position in the SJB has always been is that we are opposed to local debt restructuring. Because our position has been that inflation has been at a very high, and if anyone had savings, whether it's in a superannuation fund, maybe the employees' provident fund or other savings, they've already lost considerable value because of inflation, and it will be unfair to basically tax them again through a debt restructuring.
In other news, the World Bank today approved $700 million in budgetary and welfare support for Sri Lanka in the biggest funding tranche for the crisis-hit island since an International Monetary Fund deal in March. The funding pact aims to help Sri Lanka implement foundational reforms that restore macroeconomic stability and sustainability, mitigate the impact of current and future shocks on the poor and vulnerable, and support an inclusive and private sector-led recovery and growth path. About $500 million of the funds will be allocated for budgetary support, while the remaining $200 million will be for welfare support earmarked for those worst hit by the crisis. The World Bank Board of Directors today approved $700 million in financing for 2 operations to help Sri Lanka implement foundational reforms that restore macroeconomic stability and sustainability, mitigate the impact of current and future shocks on the poor and vulnerable, and support an inclusive and private sector-led recovery and growth plan. $500 million of the funds will be allocated for the Sri Lanka Resilience, Stability and Economic Turnaround Development Policy operation, which will support reforms that improve economic governance, enhance growth and competitiveness, and protect the poor and vulnerable. This operation will provide budgetary support in 2 equal tranches against agreed prior actions. Meanwhile, welfare support of $200 million will be allocated for the Social Protection Project. The funding was green-lighted when the World Bank Group's Board of Executive Directors met for a discussion on the new country partnership framework, Sri Lanka today. In a statement, the World Bank's country director for Sri Lanka, Fariz Haddad-Zawaz, said that through a phased approach, the World Bank Group's strategy focuses on early economic stabilization, structural reforms, and protection of the poor and vulnerable. The country director added that if sustained, these reforms can put the country back on the path towards a green, resilient and inclusive development. President Ranil Wickremesinghe today appointed new members to the Elections Commission and the Human Rights Commission. The President appointed retired Supreme Court Judge LTB Dehideniya as chairman of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Concurrently, RMAL Ratnayaka, a former Additional Commissioner General of Elections, has been appointed the chairman of the Elections Commission. Joining him in the Elections Commission are M.A. Padmasiri Chandravansha Pereira and Amir Mohammad Faiz. Meanwhile, the newly appointed members of the Human Rights Commission, as directed by the President, include Nimalasena G. Punchiheva, Thayamuthu Thanaraj, Professor Fatima Farzana Hanifa, and Dr. Gehan Dinuk Gunatilaka. Temporary driving licenses issued in the past year have been extended. More on that after a short break. Stay tuned.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන්කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ඩීමෝ වෙතින්.
වැඩම ගොඩයි ගොඩම තමයි ස්වරාජ් ට්‍රැක්ටර් ඩීමෝ වෙතින්.
Welcome back. The Department of Motor Traffic stated that the validity period of selected temporary driving licenses issued during the period from March 31st, 2022 to the 30th of June 2023 has been extended. Due to the shortage of cards for printed driver's licenses, temporary licenses were issued as an interim measure to overcome the issue. The temporary driving licenses issued within the aforementioned time period will be valid for 2 years from the date of expiry. With the sighting of the new moon, citizens of the Islamic faith across Sri Lanka celebrate the festival of Eid al-Adha today, commemorating Prophet Ibrahim's willingness to sacrifice his son to Allah. While South Asian nations, including India and Pakistan, celebrate the festival today, Muslims in other parts of the world celebrated Eid al-Adha yesterday. Eid al-Adha, also known as the Feast of Sacrifice, commemorates the Quranic tale of Prophet Ibrahim's willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael as an act of obedience to God. The festival of Eid al-Adha coincides with the climax of the Hajj, the sacred journey to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. This year, more than 1.8 million Muslims took part in the Hajj pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca as one of the world's largest religious gatherings returned to capacity following years of restrictions due to the coronavirus pandemic. The festival was celebrated in Saudi Arabia, the United States, Britain, and other Gulf countries yesterday, while India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and other South Asian nations, including Sri Lanka, celebrate the festival today. Here at home, the Islamic community engaged in religious observances across the country. In a message to mark the festival, President Ranil Wickremesinghe pointed out that the Hajj festival is an opportune occasion to memorialize and honor the unwavering dedication, sacrifice and patience of Sri Lankan citizens that helped overcome challenges faced by the country. The head of state also invited all citizens to join hands during the festival and be united in a common cause to achieve the country's domestic, regional and global goals. Meanwhile, in his message, Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena urges to reaffirm the country's commitment to further strengthen peaceful coexistence, friendship and brotherhood among the people. Meanwhile, leader of the opposition Sajid Premadasa expressed hope that the darkness of misfortune may end and usher in fortune during this Hajj season. The opposition leader also noted that the Hajj festival strengthens social values, builds harmony and reflects good deeds. Laughs Gas has assured that there is no shortage of liquefied petroleum or LP gas in the country, despite certain rumours. Commenting on the matter, Chief Executive Officer of Laughs Gas, Nalinda Kurukulasurya, assured that a 1-month's buffer stock of LP gas is currently being secured at all terminals. Meanwhile, speaking with regard to the possible reduction of LP gas prices, Kurukulasurya noted that a price revision will be made when due, assuring that the benefit of the said revision will be given to consumers. However, the price revision will depend on the value of the Sri Lankan rupee against the US dollar and the availability of LP gas. Meanwhile, Litrogas Lanka announced on the 26th of June that prices of domestic LP gas cylinders will be reduced again, following a price revision at the beginning of July. In other news, the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority confirmed that a total of 608,489,000 tourists have been recorded as of reporting. Statistics issued by the SLTDA confirmed the number of tourist arrivals recorded in Sri Lanka have increased in the first half of 2023 in comparison to last year. With all of 2022 tallying a total of approximately 700,000 arrivals, Sri Lanka is well on track to significantly better those numbers in 2023.
According to statistics issued by the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority, tourist arrivals this year up to the 26th of June were recorded at 608,489. 84,003 tourist arrivals were recorded in the month of June alone. The third week of June indicated the highest number of weekly tourist arrivals of June, numbering 4,902 compared to the first and second weeks. The SLTDA noted that the majority of arrivals were from India, numbering 22,388, contributing 28% to the total number of arrivals recorded. Meanwhile, tourists from Russia, UK and Australia were among the highest contributors to the total number of tourist arrivals this year. The SLTDA's statistics further showed that 719,978 tourist arrivals were recorded last year. In comparison, tourist arrivals so far this year are showing an increase compared to that of last year.
The Russian ruble weakened past 87 against the dollar to a 15-month low today. The ruble, hampered by domestic political risk concerns after an aborted mutiny over the weekend, plunged further with market uncertainty fueling a demand for a safe haven of assets. The ruble was 0.7% weaker against the dollar at 86.96, having hit 87.47, its weakest point since March 29th. It was down 0.7% to trade at 94.94 versus the euro and shed 0.8% against the yuan to 11.98. Capital controls have helped insulate the ruble against geopolitics in the 16 months since Russia invaded Ukraine. But Yevgeny Prigozhin's march on Moscow reverberated through markets and left questions about President Vladimir Putin's grip on power. The ruble lost a key support factor yesterday as a month-end tax period that typically sees exporters convert foreign currency revenues to meet local liabilities passed. That brings us to an end for today's news. Join us again tomorrow for more news on Sri Lanka's premier news channel, AdaDerana, at 9 p.m. for more news. For now, I'm Jonathan Benedict wishing you a very good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.